Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Coughing fit's over for now, so we're ready to roll.
Yeah, thankfully the coughing fit happened 5 seconds into our last recording because we didn't have to can too much. Yeah, we just had to restart.
I was trying to mute mine so I could cough, and then you did it at the same time.
Well, what happened was I got a major voice crack on the hello. I did a full, and then it kind of messed everything else up, and then I just started hacking up a lung, hacking up a hairball. But anyway, this run is going much better so far. We'll see if we have to can this one too.
Hairball.
But anyway, today we are here to finish up the last of our deep dive series on the Packers 2024 draft class. We're going to be finishing up here with Kitan Oladapo and Kalen King, a couple of defensive backs the Packers added late day 3. If you like what you hear and want to hear even more deep dives, we've already done every other single draft prospect. So if you go back and look, you can hear episodes on Jordan Morgan, Javon Bullard, Edgerrin Cooper, Evan Williams, Tyron Hopper, et cetera. We've done deep dives already on all of the other Packers draft prospects. We are finishing up today. So if you like what you hear, like we said, go back, check the feed. And then also come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes out, and we're going to be doing an episode every single week during the off season. So keep it tuned to that. We also tweet out, stats and data from research for these episodes, pieces of Packers news, whether that's roster moves or injury notes, content from other Packers content creators that we find interesting, or numbers from the fantasy space always has really good numbers regarding Packers receivers and Packers running backs and stuff. So we'll be retweeting stuff like that if we find it interesting. But pretty much, one-stop shopping for everything Titletown. So go check that out. Once again, it's at FatherSonPacker on Twitter. And then subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We even put all our episodes out on YouTube. If you subscribe to us there, it would really help us out. But yeah, Dad, before we get into that deep dive, though, on Oladapo and King, we did have the final open day of OTA practice, the third of 3. So we have a bit of news, a bit of notes. It was I think a slightly more competitive practice than some of the other OTAs that have been open, but still not a lot in terms of notes. A couple injury updates, though, to go over. The first thing, though, is attendance-wise, all 91 players were accounted for, so that's awesome. Elton Jenkins, Preston Smith, and Rashawn Gary had missed the last one, but they were present for this one. And then, besides a couple, players obviously not always participating, some injuries off to the side. But everyone was there, which is a really awesome development. In terms of injury updates, Jair was actually sitting out. He was on the exercise bike, but for some reason we did not get, any questions to LaFleur about that or anything else about that.
Apparently nobody asked the question afterwards,
which is
about what the
odd
deal
to
was.
Me. Yeah, isn't that strange? It's like normally it's the first thing asked is when a major player is missing time. It's like the first thing asked is like, oh yeah, Jair was on the side. How's he doing? He's dealing with this, but we didn't get any updates there. So all we can really say is he was off to the side. He was on the exercise bike. Another update is LVN was back practicing with a wrap on his thumb after breaking, as Matt LaFleur said, just the tip of his thumb. So he is back out there, which is good to see. A player going into their second year, it's good for them to maximize their practice time. And then the other thing was Zach Tom, who was dealing with that torn pec, was practicing with the rehab group. So he is at least, progressing and hopefully going to be ready by training camp.
I also think Oladapo was out of his walking boot, according to Matt Schneidman.
Yes, exactly. And I was like, do we save that for when we're doing the deep dive on Oladapo? Do we talk about
true.
that?
I even went out of order my own notes because I put that in there down with the Oladapo notes. But I'm winging it.
Yeah, I mean, just let it fly. Let it fly.
Everybody duck.
Yes. So, but that's pretty much the main updates on the injury report side. Tucker Kraft still not practicing. A few other players still not practicing. Most of the other ones are the same as the previous OTA practices. Alex Magoo came back and then also had to leave again, unfortunately. So it's going to be tough for him to, crack that rotation of wide receivers. But Dad, it's time for us to play our favorite game, Big Deal, Little Deal, No Deal, with OTA notes. So we each picked, a couple things that we found interesting from the practices, and we're going to see what the other one thinks about them. Dad, what's your first Big Deal, Little Deal, No Deal from OTAs?
So my first one is Morgan starting at right tackle ahead of Dillard.
I would say this is no deal. I would hope he's ahead of, a vet. I would hope that at this point, a first rounder is ahead of a vetmin guy. So I think this is just a natural progression, in my opinion, which this is kind of, a benchmark you should be hitting at this point. So to me, maybe little deal. I guess, he's checking the boxes.
I was going to call it a deal because it actually means something.
It's true. He's checking the boxes you want him to see. So I'll say little deal. I'll upgrade to little deal because, I would think it would be a bigger deal if he wasn't already ahead of Dillard. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's the first one where I think open to the public where they've seen him start at right tackle and Dillard was not in the starting lineup at all this time.
Yeah. It's interesting to me just because also I don't think it's as much of a deal because I think that right tackle spot is kind of spoken for. So I think it's Zach Tom's pretty much.
It's neither one of them.
Exactly. I was like, I don't think either of them are getting that right tackle job. So it's like, okay, you guys, who's placeholdering for the actual starter at right tackle today was kind of more of what it is to me. Unless they really want to end up moving Tom to center. But I think with him missing all of OTAs and most of the offseason, I think a move to center becomes less and less likely. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Okay, you ready for mine?
Sure.
Kenny Clark not participating in the full speed 11 on 11s. Big deal, little deal, or no deal. So he's participating in some of the walkthrough stuff. Yeah, right. So he's participating in some of the walkthrough stuff. Just for the listeners, he's participating in some of the walkthrough stuff. He's participating in individual drills. He's there. He's present. These are optional activities, but he's not participating in the 11 on 11s. So what do you think? Big deal, little deal, no deal?
Yeah. So the starting interior defensive linemen this week were Slayton and Wyatt. I think before it had been Slayton and Clark
for the first one, but I don't think he participated in the second.
Maybe it was also
either.
Not him last week either. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. So I can't tell what kind of deal is what's going on here. They just want to get different combinations. I think they just want to get different combinations out there and see what it looks like. I don't think it means anything.
So no deal.
I'm going no deal on this one.
Do you think? Obviously,
the only thing that can mean anything is contract.
That's the only thing I wanted to say was do you think there's any chance that it? I mean, we're wildly speculating, which is one of my favorite things to do, but do you think it has anything to do with? Because we had heard a little bit earlier in the offseason that they were talking already with him a little bit about a contract, extension. Do you think this has anything to do with that? He's only 28 years old, so while the Packers usually don't give out third contracts to players, it would be a bit of an exception given his age. It makes sense. It's not like he's 30. So do you think it has anything to do with that? Are we just, there's no way of knowing? Maybe it's one of those, there's no way of knowing things.
I think there's no way of knowing. I mean, he's there at practice participating, which makes you think it's a little less likely to be a contract. If he wasn't showing up, then you say, oh, maybe it's a contract issue, but he's there and he's doing some drills, but not others.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a simple reconcile.
Maybe it's as simple as all right, Kenny, we know what you got. You're almost 30. We're going to let you take it easy. Or maybe he's nursing something small and it's just they don't want him going 100%. Who knows? But so you're saying little deal or no deal? I forget.
I'm going to say no deal.
Okay.
I think they're just trying to look at different combinations of players out there.
All right. So what's your next one?
I'll go with multiple cornerbacks reported to have tight coverage in drills. Stokes on Watson, King on Watson, Valentine on Heath.
I'm going to say little deal. At this stage in camp, in the offseason program, it's usually normal for the defense to be ahead of the offense. But at the same time, the offense is mostly returning all of their pieces and running the same system, while as the defense is learning everything new and has a lot more new pieces to incorporate. So I would definitely say at least a little deal. It's definitely, I would say a good sign because I think, a lot of us feel confident in the offense and confident with what they have there, but the question mark is more the defense and the special teams, but we're not talking about that today. But for the defense, I think it's just good to see okay, proof of concept, they have the corners to play man coverage. They have the secondary guys to play man coverage, and they're succeeding in man coverage against pretty talented group of wide receivers. So yeah, I would say little deal. What do you think about it?
I think it's a little deal. I think it's, it's a good sign.
Yeah, exactly. And at this stage of the offseason, nothing is really more than that. It's, right. I don't know what would have to happen for big deal. I mean, obviously knock on wood, but for big deal to really come out. So I agree. Okay. That leaves me with, my last one, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you got?
AJ Dillon looking svelte in practice, looking lighter,
I almost
looking leaner.
picked this too because he's the best shape he's ever been in.
Best shape of his life, baby.
Is it mandatory to have one of these in every big deal, little deal?
I don't know. He's got new teeth. He's looking a little.
He's got new teeth.
Yeah, he got some veneers in.
I did not see the thing about the teeth.
That?
I didn't see a picture of his face. You know, I saw the tweets about how he's looking svelte, but also jacked. His arms are bigger. He's looking skinnier. He's looking more explosive.
So big deal, little deal, no deal. I know this is your favorite type of off-season talk. Best shape of his life. He's looking like a whole new player.
Because they say it every year about like half the players.
I know they do, but you agree, he actually does look skinnier, right? Like to me, I notice he's noticeably thinner to me.
Yeah, one thing what I'd like to have seen is like some more movement. See how it's actually translating.
Okay, so you're saying no deal? You're saying no deal until you can see.
I'll say little deal. I'll give you a little deal.
So the Packers' third running back looking slightly skinnier than he did last year. We got a little deal. Awesome, sweet. At least it matters. Matters about
two
this
thumbs,
much.
Way up.
Who has 2 thumbs and has lost 10 pounds? But anyway, so that has concluded our OTA, coverage. This time of year, it's really awesome. Thank you to all of the, Packers beat reporters who tweet out all this information, who keep us informed. Shout out to them. It's very awesome for those of us who are, really feeling the withdrawal from football season this time of year and could use any little nugget of information that they can get. So anyway, thank you to all the Packers beat reporters for going out there in the heat and keeping us informed. But Dad, should we move on to the deep dive portion and start talking about Kitan Oladapo?
Yes. Before I start going completely off rails and just talking about whatever I see pop up trending on my Twitter feed right now.
I was going to say that's a dangerous place to be right now. But anyway, so starting off with the first of our deep dives today is Kitan Oladapo. Packers took him in the 5th round, 169th overall. A little bit about him from Dane Brugler's guide, The Beast. He's 23 years old. He was a preferred walk-on at Oregon State, so they wanted him there, but they weren't going to give him a scholarship or anything. So that's something. He had to earn his spot. He's known for changing his hair color game to game, so that'll probably be make him a bit of a fan favorite, I'm sure. And he was second team All Pac-12 his final year at Oregon State. Dad, what was your initial reaction when they made this pick, or is there something you want to throw in?
Throw in his bio about how he seems to embrace rivalries and is a loyal Oregon State player. Meaning,
yes,
he and Oregon do not get along.
No, they do not. But Dad, what was your initial thought when they made this pick?
So my first thought was it was good to add a safety with a different profile than the others on the team. He's significantly bigger than the other safeties and may add a different style play, particularly being able to play as a box safety.
Yeah, my initial reaction was this was someone that I had my eye on as a late round flyer amongst safeties. So definitely someone that I was happy they took. I think he can be, a plus special teamer right away, just given his size and his linear athleticism. And then I think that, he was the type of guy where it's there aren't really that many safeties that are this big coming out. He looks large out there when you see him out there for Oregon State. And so I was really excited about it. I think, he moves well for that size. He's not an elite mover, but he moves well for his size. Good hustle player. Everything about him sounds, exciting. And so my initial reaction was oh yeah, that was a guy that I wanted them to take a look at. And, it seems like a good addition there in the late 5th round. But Dad, speaking about, some of that athleticism, do you want to take us through his physical profile and, how he measured out compared to other safeties?
Right. So just to go through the process again, I get all the measurements and athletic ability from RAS or Draft Scout and Mock Draftable, getting the percentiles of where they fall from RAS, except for hand size, arm length, and wingspan, which I get from Mock Draftable. I also pick up whatever else I can. He was in the Senior Bowl, so we have some on-field speed tracking from the Zebra Tech there. And so for that, he was below average in on-field speed, 40 out of 60 safeties that have on-field speed data from the last, whatever it was, 6 years, 60 safeties. Mm-hmm. I separated out the defensive backs into safeties and corners. I did not, however, do kind of a mass correction. So, speed, see how much
What's the momentum looking like?
Generating.
What's the mass times velocity?
Nor did I. And so then his max acceleration is kind of similar. He's 36 out of 60, just a little bit below average. And his max deceleration is almost right around. So his ability, how quickly he can stop, he's like middle of the pack.
Yeah, which, to be middle of the pack at his size is, reasonably impressive.
Yeah. He's almost as big as, some of the linebackers now.
And I think that would be an interesting way to deploy him is, some people, coming out of the draft saw him as more of a dime linebacker. But sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
Yeah, so his overall RAS is 8.18, so that's like 82nd percentile. His top comp on RAS is Marcus Washington, who was a 6th round pick of New England back in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, he's a little bigger, a little slower, and a little, than Green Bay's average safety under Gutekunst. And his, for his size, he's got, amongst safeties, he's got 92 percentile height at 6'2", which is 1.5 inches above Green Bay's average. He's got 96 percentile weight at 216 pounds, 10 pounds more than Green Bay's average safety.
Mm-hmm. He's a big safety. He is large for a safety, and he looks large out there.
Yeah, his hands are 9.25 inches, which puts him at only the 44th percentile, a little bit below average, but it's basically right on Green Bay's average. His arms are 32 3/8 inches long, 1 inch more than Green Bay's average, and at 76th percentile, so decent amount above average for arm length. And his wingspan is 76 7/8 of an inch, 63rd percentile amongst safeties, 1 inch bigger than Green Bay's average. So, generally a pretty big safety compared to Green Bay and to, the last, 20 years of safeties.
Mm-hmm.
Now for his athleticism, he's got a 62 percentile 40, which at 4.58, which is pretty good at being one of the 90th percentile in height and weight. 0.06 seconds slower than Green Bay's average safety. 55th percentile of the 20-yard split at 2.66, 0.04 slower than Green Bay average, and 70th percentile in the 10-yard split, 1.58, which is basically right on Green Bay's average. Which kind of thing I like those 10-yard splits.
Yeah, it's what you're doing more often than not.
Yeah, and that's where he's best in terms of his speed.
And the fact that the 10-yard split is right bang on average, and he's substantially larger than the average Green Bay safety is that. I mean, that's definitely something.
Yeah, he's he did the bench. He's 60 percentile with 15 bench reps, which is actually 2 less than Green Bay's average. 71 percentile in the vert at 36 inches, right on Green Bay's average, and 37 percentile in the broad, so a little below average on the broad at 9 feet 9 inches, which is 7 inches less than Green Bay's average. So, and he didn't do any agilities.
I can't say that I'm surprised that he did not do any agilities. No offense, but that does not feel like it would have been great for. It would not have improved his RAS, is what I'm going to say, in my opinion.
Based on the tape,
he's just a really long linear guy. He's got long legs. So I don't think the 3-cone would have been great.
How much of a like Tariq Carpenter vibe do you get?
I like him more than I liked Carpenter. Carpenter was like really just a linebacker. Like he was just a linebacker and special teamer. I think Oladapo like can actually play a little safety.
Yeah, Carpenter, even though they list him as both safety and linebacker, he was much bigger.
Yeah, he was like 230 something, right? Like he was
230.
Like, yeah, he was really just a linebacker pretty much. I don't think they ever really saw him as a safety. So
then one thing I did is I'm always looking for upside. How much can we delude ourselves into thinking that all of our players are the best ever?
So how does it compare to plenty? There's no limit to that.
Right. It's like year-round hopium.
Oh yeah.
Especially in the offseason.
I could talk myself into any single one of these guys being, serviceable to very good. And that's the thing. Like coming into last year, I was deluding myself into the hopium. I was like, oh, Carl Brooks, like he's going to be a great. Hey, he had a really good first year. So
he was really good.
I'm just saying. I'm not saying. But anyway, sorry. Continue.
So how does Oladapo compare to all pro safeties from the last 10 years? So I do kind of what I've always done here is I get their kind of optimal score. So what traits seem to matter the most, and what I've decided now is to look for the physical or athletic traits for which it's more likely to be elite than below average. And so I got all the all pro safeties from 2014 to 2023, which gave me 25 players. Got their optimal RAS based on either pro day or combine measurements, whatever given the best possible RAS, and getting pro day data a lot of times from Draft Scout if it wasn't already in the RAS, and mock draftable for the hand, arm, and wingspan measurements. So what measurements seem to matter amongst these all pros? So what are the most common? So the ones that matter the most were speed, especially 40 time, and then also 3-cone and overall RAS. If you look at
so those three, so the 3-cone, the 40 time, and the overall RAS were the like biggest, thing in common amongst the all pros in terms of having elite in those traits.
Especially, so if you look at the 40 time, you had 11 players who had an elite 40, so that's over 80 percentile, and only one who was below average. So that's like,
and you were looking at a sample of how many was it again? 15,
25.
20? 25. Okay, so 11 of the 25.
So a lot of them were in the middle, sort of between 50 and 80%. It's like the yellow, the good range.
Only one had a bad 40 time.
Only one had a bad 40 time. That was actually Hufanga.
Yeah, which is interesting because that's the kind of scheme that the Packers are going to be playing, which is something just to think about. But
and then in the short time, like the 20, there's like 7 elite, only 2 in the poor. And then for the 3-cone, you had, what do we get, like 13 elite to 5 in the poor.
Yeah, although overall, it doesn't really matter as much for Oladapo since we don't have the short shuttle and 3-cone, unfortunately.
Right.
But we we can just imagine that he did well in them, and then he'll fit.
Right. So what measurements don't seem to matter? Size. If anything, shorter was better, and weight was irrelevant. You have had more players who are like below average height than elite height. Elite, as measured as being more. The bench didn't matter. Short shuttle didn't matter, and like hand size didn't matter. Those were all you're just as many players were poor or below average as were elite for those measurements.
Yeah. At risk of derailing this into one of those, guys talk about old like athletes and start naming old athletes conversations. I'm trying to remember the last like really big, like good safety. Like the last safety that was just like really large. Obviously, the first one that pops in my mind is Cam Chancellor, but there has to have been one since then that was like a really large safety that was like putting up all pro numbers.
Kyle Hamilton weighs 220.
Okay, well that would be the one.
He's 6'4".
He's really
6'4", 220.
He always looks so like thin to me. Like I know he's tall, but I never thought he was 220.
His measurements, 6'4", 1/4", 220. So if you're looking for a big safety, recent safety, who's looking good, he's the one.
That's probably the best safety in the league. So Oladapo, just whatever he's doing, copy that. But anyway, sorry, continue.
And Derwin James weighs 215.
But he's not as like tall and long as Hamilton or Oladapo.
Yeah, but Hamilton is kind of the poster child for the elite big safety right now.
Yeah.
So how does Oladapo compare to these, the all pro safeties for the measurements that seem to matter? So kind of lining him up, he would be like 10th out of 25 in overall RAS, 23rd in the 40, so near the bottom, and he didn't do a 3-cone. So those are it's kind of like, well, he's not disqualified. The 40 time's a little bit low to be in the group. Yeah. And we have no idea what he would have done in the 3-cone, whether he also would have been kind of at the bottom.
I don't think he would have done amazing in the 3-cone. Obviously, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but his build and the way he plays, I don't think would have done amazing in the agilities. And that's probably why he didn't run them.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting to me is that there seems to be a little bit more possibility for the 3-cone to matter than for the shuttle.
Yeah, which is, I guess makes some sense. You're turning more in space as a safety than you are like planning and stopping and changing directions, but I don't know. Yeah. I feel like you would think that those two tests would be correlated, and that
maybe if we got this up to like 100 players, something.
It's true. We're working with small sample sizes.
We're still working with small sample sizes, and then so that's kind of where he lines up in terms of how he compares to other players, other Packer
other
players
successful players,
and successful all pro players. his injury history is currently, out with a broken toe that happened during the combine. So maybe I don't know when in the combine that happened. Maybe some of his numbers were affected.
True, and maybe that's why he didn't. That's probably why he didn't run agilities. Is
right.
Like, to be fair to him,
that's like one of the last things. Is at like the end of the day,
and oftentimes, I was going to say oftentimes they end up
because they're doing it late, tired.
Exactly, and I was going to say oftentimes players end up running the agilities at their pro days. But if you break your toe at the combine, you're not going to be able to run agilities at the pro day. He never
did a pro day. Right.
Exactly.
But in college, he was very durable. He played in all 13 games his last 3 years at Oregon State.
Yeah, and, the broken toe was something he said, happened during the process. Teams knew about it. And, he still went late fifth round. So you wonder, like, if without that, injury flag, would he have maybe gone even earlier? Hard to know. But yeah, so he's certainly an interesting, physical profile in terms of his size and still being, pretty fast at that size. But yeah, anything else that you wanted to talk about on that physical profile side before we talk about, how his production fared in college?
No, I think I covered all the bases there. I had to do some quick lookup to get some percentiles that I forgot to write down in the middle of that.
Amateur hour right there, not having everything written down beforehand.
It's like, ooh, there's a blank spot there. What the heck did I do there?
I saw just percentile written, and then I was like, oh, that's what he's looking at. I was like, what are you clicking at?
I actually looked up those numbers. I did not make up those numbers in the middle of the podcast. I actually looked up those numbers.
Well, speaking of numbers that we looked up, some numbers per PFF for his time at Oregon State when he was in college. So he didn't. I just want to preface all this with he didn't start playing safety until college, and this was according to Dane Brugler's The Beast, which is, an excellent resource. He was a corner coming into Oregon State, and he made that transition from corner to safety his redshirt year. So just keep that in mind when looking at that. In general, I do think he's with his usage at Oregon State, a lot more versatile than people are necessarily giving him credit for. A lot of people are like, oh, he's a box safety only. He's pretty much a dime linebacker is what some people are saying. But, in 2023, he spent 37% of his time in the box, 22% of his time deep, and 35% of his time in the slot. So a really pretty even split. Obviously more time in the box than anywhere else. But, he's playing a lot of different places. He's showing some versatility at the college level. And in 2022 was very similar. 34% of his snaps in the box, 37% deep, and 25% in the slot. So he's getting use a lot of different places in that Oregon State defense. And so, maybe that projects to, a variety of ways he could be used at the NFL level, and that he won't necessarily need to be pigeonholed into, just this one role. He's done a lot of different things in his time in college. In 2023, looking at a subset of 492 qualifying safeties. So these are players who played safety and then played a significant number of snaps where it's like, okay, we can actually decide how good you are. So 492 players in 2023. Amongst those, he ranked 123rd in yards per coverage snap of 492. So, upper 75th percentile, 70th percentile in yards per coverage snap, which is a number that we really like because, yards per target is a good number for, hey, how are you doing when you're getting thrown at? But yards per coverage snap kind of captures the idea that, hey, the best coverage guys are not getting thrown at very much. So it kind of captures that idea as well. You're getting essentially a benefit for times that you're not getting targeted. So he was 123rd in yards per coverage snap of those 492, which is a solid number. He was 115th in yards per target of those safeties, which is also a pretty good number, upper 75th, 80th percentile there. That means that when he was getting thrown at, he was doing a good job of, making plays on the ball. He was 142nd in missed tackle rate, so still above average, but not, an amazing number, but above average there. And he was 143rd in stop rate, which is, essentially the number of stops you make per run snap. And that a stop is defined by PFF as any tackle that constitutes a failure for the offense. So, he's above average in stop rate. He was, for what it's worth, I don't put like a super ton of stock into PFF grades, but it is another piece of like another data point in terms of, when, a certain number of people who watch a lot of football watch him play, how good do they think he's playing? And that is certainly useful data to have. It's not the end all be all, but it's useful data. But he was the 5th highest graded safety in all of college football per PFF. And he was the 4th highest graded safety in run defense by PFF amongst FBS and FCS safeties with at least 240 snaps. So he was really highly graded against the run. He was really highly graded overall per PFF. And a lot of his, underlying numbers there are well above average and well within what you would want to see. In terms of what scouts had to say about him, Dane Brugler had him his 11th safety with a 4th or 5th round grade. Quote, A 3-year starter at Oregon State, Oladapo was a versatile safety and defensive coordinator Trent Bray's hybrid 3-3-5 stack. A former walk-on at corner, he transitioned to safety in Corvallis and earned all Pac-12 honors each of the last 3 seasons. Oladapo confidently reads, run, pass, and aggressively drives downhill with competitive urgency to make impactful tackles. His average twitch and build-up speed out of transitions will be more noticeable versus NFL receivers, but his route awareness helps him stay connected in coverage. Overall, Oladapo doesn't have ideal top-end speed or rangy ball skills for deep coverage, but he is a good-sized athlete who trusts his sightlines and enjoys making noise in the run game. He protects best as a down safety who can also earn his paycheck on special teams. And then Lance Zierlein of NFL.com had him as a 4th-rounder. Quote, Oladapo possesses classic strong safety traits and play attributes, which should help evaluators define him more easily. He has very good size with the play strength and toughness to tackle near the box and enough cover skills to line up over tight ends in man. While he can play some split safety, he can be a little inconsistent in big space, so playing forward is his best bet. There is room for improvement as a tackler, but he generally pursues with leverage and takes his role as last line of defense to heart. He has, quote, make it, end quote, size and attributes. He's likely to come in as a backup with special teams duties, but has a pretty good shot of becoming an eventual starter. And his comp was Jaquiski Tartt, the longtime Niners safety, who is, also, bigger safety. But Dad, that's what scouts had to say about him. What did the Packers have to say about him when they took him, when they drafted him?
Yeah, so I was able to find a quote from John Eric Sullivan, the VP of Player Personnel, via Paul Brettel. Found this at ESPNlacrosse.com. And what he said was he's a little different body type than the other two, meaning the other two safeties, Bullard and Williams. He's a big 6'2", 216-pound kid, long arms, aggressive. When he hits you, you go down. He's a very good athlete at that size. He can pedal, he can flip, he can turn. He's versatile, more of a true safety, but he can play that big nickel or will linebacker if you need him to. Does it the play style? He's very smart. He's a captain as well. One good football player, and 2, the kind of person we want to infuse in this locker room.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you want to hear, and that's awesome to hear. But yeah, so that's what the scouts had to say about him. That's what the Packers had to say about him. Dad, what did you overall think after, taking some time to watch him, and what were your final thoughts? And, break out after looking at these numbers, after looking at his production, after watching him a little bit, what were your final thoughts on Oladapo?
So one thing I saw in going through some of his highlights is he makes plays on the ball, and he's looking to force fumbles. He's swinging and punching at the ball a lot while he's tackling, and something he did successfully on several occasions. And with Green Bay being 30th in the league last year in fumbles forced, this is a skill set they could definitely use.
Yeah, they need more activity around the ball. They didn't have any they were one of the worst teams in terms of forcing turnovers last year in the league. So having a guy who's willing to make plays on the ball would be a big get. For me, after watching Oladapo, I watched their game against Washington, and I watched the game against Arizona and Washington, were the two that I watched in depth for him. For me, he is a very linear athlete. His turning is not amazing. Once he's going somewhere, it's hard for him to really stop and turn. I thought the Arizona game was kind of a struggle for him. He did not play great in that game, but he was much better in against Washington, but just by my eye. That's just my opinion. He did have one awesome rep against Arizona where he slowed down McMillan. This is the one that you see posted a lot. I think Ben Fennell posted it. I think Andy Herman posted it, where McMillan, who's going to be a highly thought of receiver in next year's draft class for Arizona, goes in a speed motion from right to left, and Oladapo is screaming at someone else to pick up the assignment, but they just don't hear him. And so he's forced to, run with him and cover him coming back across the motion, and does a really good job. He probably grabs him a little bit, but it does a good job breaking him up at the catch point. Overall, though, I thought he struggled at times with when things started happening behind him. I thought he struggled to get sufficient depth in his deep zones. There's one where they're playing cover 2 and he just triggers down on a crosser across the middle that honestly is covered, and then the guy just goes into the vacated zone behind him for a big play. The one play against Washington that really stands out is I forget the Washington running back's name, but he breaks away, and this is the one you see a lot in a lot of clips as well, where he chases him down from behind and punches the ball out, which is obviously what you want to see.
That's the one within the around the
within
5-yard
line. Exactly. Yeah, where he chases him down from behind, punches it out. It's a massive play, and it just shows everything that he's about in terms of hustle, high character, awesome like straight line speed in terms of, chasing him down from behind when he's way outside of the play. You see the speed because he's hunting him down. Like he is chasing him down, and like the speed shows up there.
Yeah, and it's not like he was beating the play personally, because he was in coverage on another guy and came off of him when the run play goes up the middle and chases him down and punches the ball out from behind.
Yeah, which is, I think that's like the high upside in terms of, hustle player, like going to make physical plays. His size shows up too. Like you see him out there, you can immediately tell who he is because he's like clearly like a lot bigger than every other defensive back on the Oregon State roster. But so yeah, my overall thought, I think he's going to be a good special teamer. I worry about him, playing deep zones. I worry about him playing, that more traditional like cover 2 safety. I just think like the times he struggled to get depth. And struggle to turn and run with guys sometimes. But overall, I think there's definitely a role for him on Green Bay. Dad, any last things you wanted to add, or should we move on to Kalen King?
Yeah, I would just say I think we can expect him to play his best, and he's like closer to the line of scrimmage. Than deep. Which
is interesting because I kind of feel the same way about Evan Williams as well. So I wonder, how they're going to deploy these safeties. Although apparently Evan Williams and Bullard have been, moving around a lot. But anyway, that's not who we're talking about today. But let's move on to Kalen King, cornerback out of Penn State, who the Packers took in the 7th round, 255th overall. So almost right there at Mr. Relevant range. A little bit about him. He is only 21 years old, and he won't turn 22 until January. So that means he was born, for those of you who are trying to feel really old, he was born in 2003. So just keep that in mind. He's going to be one of the younger players in the league this year. He was second team All Big Ten last year and second team All American the year before. So just that's a little bit about him. Very young player. A player who was really good 2 years ago was a guy who I'm sure everyone here who has heard this already, but he was a guy who a lot of people were projecting as a first-round pick. And then, via a combination
the conversation for like number 1 corner in the class.
Exactly. He was great at Penn State the year prior with, Joey Porter across from him. Maybe it's, he's having to go up against more ones, and that was why. But some kind of combination of, not having the best 2023-2024 season and then really struggling on the, pre-draft like phase in terms of, he struggled at the Senior Bowl. He didn't test very well. Kind of a combination of all of that kind of crashed him down to the 7th round. But this is the type of player where, if all that stuff had gone well for him, he wouldn't have been available in the 7th round for the Packers. So that's something to keep in mind. Dad, what was your initial reaction when the Packers took King at this spot?
Yeah, so I basically thought he was a potential steal in the 7th round at a position where they needed more depth. And maybe it won't work out, but it's definitely worth a shot. And then if you saw his interview after, he's super motivated and emotional after his fall in the draft.
Yeah. My initial reaction is very similar to yours. It's like, hey, they needed more corners. I am totally down for the like, hey, the previous year was better bet. Like similar to how they did with Dontavian Wicks, where it's like, hey, 2 years ago, this guy was awesome. This past year, we don't know what happened. It didn't go great, but we're willing to bet that he's going to have a return to form, and kind of, betting on that almost as like a market inefficiency where it's like, hey, if he had a great year this year, we would never have been able to get him here. But so let's just pretend that didn't happen and just see what happens. It's a 7th rounder anyway. Who cares? We're taking a high upside swing. I don't know if you remember, like kind of early in the process before the combine, people had him mocked to the Packers in the 2nd round. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I remember, watching him at the Senior Bowl and being like, oh my goodness, this guy is real. Like my initial reaction was like, oh, it's a 7th rounder. It doesn't matter. But I remember watching him at the Senior Bowl and being like, oh, goodness, this guy can't play. He's getting beat by every single receiver out here. And so I was, because I remember I watched those Senior Bowl one-on-ones like pretty diligently because I was interested in the corner class. And I remember like, oh, this Kalen King is getting beat again. It's like, oh man, this Kalen King is way off of his guy and he's getting beat again. And I was like, oh man, this is a really struggle for this guy. Like the fact that he, obviously, we're going to be talking about the positives as well, but this was part of the reason he fell is because, the Senior Bowl did not go well for him. Testing didn't go well for him. But I remember at the Senior Bowl thinking like, oh man, like he stood out because of how much he was struggling. Like that's not ideal. So that's part of my initial reaction. But obviously, when you're taking a player this late, they're not going to be a perfect prospect. So I do think it was a good pick. It was a place where they needed more depth. I think he can play on the inside, which is obviously a spot that I think that they can improve. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about him though, Dad. And, like I said, he struggled a little bit in the testing. How did he, compare to Packers players, all pros? Is there hope for him? Let us know how his, physical profile matches out.
Right. So I went through the same process as all the rest of the players in terms of getting their speed, whatever testing or measurements were available from RAS football or Draft Scout, and calculating the optimal RAS using the RAS calculator tool on the RAS site, and then also looking at where else we could get numbers. So he was at the Senior Bowl, as you mentioned, and so his on-field speed measurements, his maximum speed was a little above average at 30th out of 75 corners who've been there, had measurements taken in the last 60 years. I think it's in 2018. 11th out of 75 in max acceleration. So he's in the kind of the elite range there in max acceleration, 85th percentile, but below average in max deceleration. So his stopping ability. Now, some of this, like maybe I should say about these measurements at the Senior Bowl, maybe it's not a big enough sample size to see people actually get to their true max in these plays or not. But
I do think on-field data, tracking data, is where the sport is trending. Because I think,
for sure.
Just as an aside,
I think the teams have stuff that they have. They're
exactly
that we never hear.
Yeah, and I think 5 to 10 years from now, I think a lot of the it's tough because the 40-yard dash, the 3-cone, the short shuttle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have a larger piece of you have more historical data to compare against. But I think 5 to 10 years from now, I think it's going to be all on-field tracking for speed measurements and stuff like that, because that's really what matters.
And it's going to be all on-field tracking with video data.
Yeah, that's true. I think
so
computer
you don't
vision
need to have any.
And that's the way that you can and that's the way that you can skirt this idea of needing a larger historical sample, because if you can use computer vision to measure this kind of speed and stuff like that, then you can use it on any video ever, and you will have a larger historical sample of data.
This is for sure going to happen. Or is this actually? It's probably
already happened. Yeah, it's already happening for sure.
But anyway, so looking at his RAS score, I took his best results because he definitely improved some things in his pro day. So if you looked at just his combine, his RAS is 6.68. Still not bad. It's still in the good. But he was able to improve his speed and his agility a bit with his pro day. So with that, he got an 8.14 using his best results to RAS. So that gets him into the great / elite green level, but it's still overall significantly less than Green Bay's average, which is 0.8 less than Green Bay's average RAS, or the RAS of Green Bay's average corner of 8.94. For his size, he's 62 percentile height, 5'11" and a quarter, half an inch less than Green Bay's average, 61 percentile weight, 191 pounds, 4 pounds less than Green Bay's average. And we've heard a lot about how Green Bay doesn't like to take smaller corners, especially for weight. 20th percentile in hands, small hands, 8.75 inches, half an inch less than Green Bay's average. 29 percentile arm length, 30.875 inches, half an inch less than Green Bay's average, and 27 percentile wingspan, 74 and a quarter, 1.5 inches less than Green Bay's average. So his athleticism, we take his Penn State Pro Day, which was reported at 4.52 in the 40. He's at 63rd percentile in the 40, which is significantly better than his 4.61 40 at the combine. But it's still, even with the Pro Day, it's still 0.05 seconds slower than Green Bay's average. His 53rd percentile 20-yard split of 2.64 seconds was 0.04 seconds slower than Green Bay's average. Now, his 10-yard split was his best thing, which at the NFL.com combine site was reported as a 1.54, which is 83rd percentile in the 10-yard split, and 0.01 seconds faster than Green Bay's average. That was his kind of most elite testing trait. He didn't do a bench. He was 76th percentile in the vert, 37 inches, half an inch better than Green Bay's average, 64 percentile in the broad jump at 10 feet 2 inches, 3 inches worse than Green Bay's average. So that's something they've cared about, is the broad. And 81 percentile in the short shuttle at 4.14, 0.06 seconds better than Green Bay's average. And he didn't do a 3-cone. So then again, how does this compare? Not just to, so we've done the Green Bay comparison. How does this compare to the all-pro corners? So first, what measurements matter? So from the last 10 years, got 34 corners, got their optimal testing scores. as we did before, and calculated the RAS scores based on that. And I did a little bit of trying to separate like slot corners from boundary corners. So I got there.
Yeah, there is the thought that, Kalen King is going to be a slot at the next level. And it's interesting because he actually played almost no slot at all at Penn State. But some people are projecting, with him running a slower 40 and, not necessarily having these top end speed, that maybe, working in like the inside with a tighter space might be better for him. So that's why we were thinking maybe looking at just the slot corners.
Yeah. So what I did is I got the percentage of snaps at corner from slot versus a boundary. So I kind of threw away the box snaps or deep snaps. So like lined up. I just looking at only as corner and figured out which players actually had played more than half the snaps in the slot. And I only got 4 out of those 34 players who. Yeah. So there definitely is a bias towards boundary corners in the All-Pro teams.
Yeah, makes sense.
But but those 4 are not outliers compared to the rest in terms of their athletic
similar,
ability. The speed's
similar profiles.
Identical. The 40, 20, and 10. The 20 and 10 are actually identical for the averages, those 4 compared to the rest. Those slot corners were light, 3.5 pounds lighter, an inch and a half shorter.
Yeah, marginally smaller, but otherwise mostly physically the
marginally
same.
Smaller, but not actually slower. But again, this is a very small sample size of slot corners. Yeah. So there's nothing really you could say that he's more like a slot corner or more like boundary corner.
At least when looking at this top
small
level guys.
Sample of All-Pro, these top level guys. Right.
Yeah.
So then let's look at the group as a whole. What measurements seem to matter? Overall, RAS was important. 18 were elite and only 2 were poor. Mm-hmm. And the ones who were poor, I think, were from further back, 2016 and 2014. A little further to go to get those poor RAS scores. Size mattered, especially weight. 16 elite to only 3 below average in weight for corners. Although height also matters, 17 were elite in height and only 6 for poor. So this is kind of opposite where we had, you might, for safety and some of the other positions, like I think offensive tackle, better to be short.
Yeah, we're better to be shorter, yeah.
Corner, better to be taller. Speed was important. For the 40, there were 16 elite to only 5 poor. And in the 10, there were 18 elite to only 4 that were poor. So maybe even a little bit more important at the 10-yard split. And the broad jump mattered. 17 were elite and only 4 were poor. Measurements that don't seem to matter. Vertical, the short shuttle, and the 3-cone all have the similar frequency of below average and elite. So none of those seem to matter, at least in this sample size. So that was a little bit surprising. So compared to these All-Pro corners for the measurements that seem to matter, Kalen King would have been 19th out of the 32 in RAS, 16th out of 31 in the 10-yard split, 27th out of 33 in the 40, and that's with his better 40 time. That's the main concern. If you demand the combine, then he would have been last.
Yeah.
23rd out of 30 in the broad, so significantly below average in the broad. And he is also the 10th shortest corner in the group and the 7th heaviest, so one of the lighter ones as well.
Yeah, small and slow is a little scary. It's definitely a little scary.
Doing this exercise also, you do see where some of the Packers' tendencies come from. They don't want corners below a certain threshold in weight, and that shows up in the All Pros as well.
Yeah, they need to be a certain size to play. That's true.
So that's his profile. So he's got some limitations compared to the best corner. Not surprisingly, if he had tested like one of the best corners,
I was going to say,
then he would have been a first rounder.
He wouldn't have been a 7th rounder. Yeah, exactly. He wouldn't have been available
from a year ago. So that looked like, so injury history. I was trying to go to the injury history. It's a funny note. I just Googled Kalen King injury, and my top hit was Kalen King has a permanent chip on his shoulder from falling in the draft.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought it was going to be literally.
No, not like a bone chip. No, it was he has a permanent chip on his shoulder from falling in the draft. Was the number 1 hit for injury because in his last 3 years he's played 13 games, and 12 games in his career at Penn State. So basically, little or no missed time to injury at Penn State.
Yeah, and that's awesome.
So that's good.
for his time at Penn State, just transitioning a little to his production profile and how he played there. As most of you who have, if you haven't heard about Kalen King, the big story about him is he was great in 2022 and not so great in 2023. So comparing those 2 years with some data per PFF, in 2023, let's start with 2022. In 2022, compared to a sample size of 507 corners who, played enough snaps and also played corner, he was 195th in yards per coverage snap. So well above average. And given the fact that he was going against, some of the better receivers in the country, that's a pretty decent number, but well above average in yards per coverage snap. He was 92nd, though, in yards per target, and he was actually 4th in the country in number of pass breakups. So he was making a lot of great plays on the ball. When they threw it at him, he was doing really well. He was getting targeted a good amount, too, because, with Joey Porter on the other side, they were going at him. Joey Porter, was the first pick in the second round 2 years ago, so they had a really good corner from that year. And then he was 59th amongst those 507 corners, so really high in catch rate allowed. So when they were throwing at him in 2022, he was answering the bell, really well. And they were throwing at him a good amount. So that was part of the reason why coming into 2023, his stock was so high. It was like, oh, this is like a guy who's elite at making plays on the ball. He's played against some of the best receivers in the country in the Big Ten. And, he when they thrown at him, other teams were trying to, pick at him, trying to target him. And he was having none of it. He was playing great. 2023 comes around, though. And then this is amongst 492 corners, but he goes down to 260th in yards per coverage snap, so below average. 222nd in yards per target, pretty much bang on average. And then 320th in catch rate allowed. So a lot more success targeting him in 2023 than in 2022.
Man, that catch rate change is
the catch rate
staggering.
change is going from, top 10% to well below average is, not ideal. So that's kind of the tale of it is he was just substantially worse when targeted in 2023 than in 2022. He didn't make nearly as many plays on the ball. And you could tell yourself a story that, hey, plays on the ball may be a bit of a noisy stat. Maybe you run that season back 100 times and 99 times he's better than that at, making more plays on the ball, but it just did not go well for him in 2023 when he was thrown at. In terms of what scouts had to say about him, Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him as his corner 26. He had him as a 5th or 6th round player. Quote, a 2-year starter, King was an outside corner in former Penn State defensive coordinators Manny Diaz's split coverage scheme. He put himself on the NFL radar with a standout 2022 season and looked like a future first-round pick. However, cornerback is a volatile position, and King's 2023 tape exemplified that. He managed just 2 passes defended in his final college season. And struggled against the top opponents on his schedule, most notably in a tough matchup against Ohio State's Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. really, really cooked him. And, to be fair, I mean, he's one of the best wide receiver prospects ever. Sorry, that was me adding my own aside. But anyway, back to what Dane Brugler had to say. Quote, growing up with a twin who shared the same passion for football meant King had a lifelong competitor, which helped develop his tenacity and toughness. Though he is a springy athlete, his twitch can be negated by below-average long speed and underdeveloped route anticipation versus savvy receivers. Overall, King is a fluid athlete with the aggressive play personality desired for the position, but his inconsistent tackling, coverage spacing, and feel for when to take chances will continue to result in volatility in his game. He is viewed as a possible safety candidate by several NFL teams, end quote. And then Lance Zierlein had him as a 6th, 7th round player. Quote, King's 2022 performance was significantly better than what he put on tape in 23, but it might not be enough to sway some evaluators. King was consistently rocked out of position by route breaks over the first 2 levels and didn't find the ball frequently enough with his back to the passer on deep shots. He doesn't have the fluidity to just mirror and match routes, so he'll need to get back to playing more physically from press to slow down route momentum. King is more than capable of tilting 50-50 balls in his favor when he's in position, but finding positioning in man or zone coverages as a pro could be very challenging, end quote. So kind of similar things to be said by the scouts is 2023, when he was targeted, just did not do as well getting the ball than he did in 2022 and just struggled against some of the top level competition. Dad, what did the Packers have to say about, King when they took him?
Yeah, so I listening to from pressers from Brian Kudigans. He said expected him to go a lot higher, felt very fortunate to be able to pick him. He's got a really nice skill set, played some high level at Penn State, and has versatility to play outside of nickel. Hopefully that will drive him. It's hard to tell why he fell. And more from Goodikins via Paul Brettel at Packers Wire said, I think our league has a long history of guys who felt they were overlooked and used that as motivation to drive themselves. hopefully that'll be the case.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's true. If anyone is going to be the most motivated in this class, it's going to be Kalen King. Because here's a guy who, oh goodness, put a dollar in the Chris Collinsworth jar. Now here's a guy who, like I said, it's just night and day from, how he was looking in 2022 and how he was thought of as a prospect to how it ended up working out for him in the draft in 2023. And like you said, the number one injury result is, has a permanent chip on his shoulder from falling that far. And so you can either let it, destroy him or drive him, and we're going to see. But Dad, after all of that, what are your final thoughts on Kalen King?
So in watching his tape, I really think he could play in the slot. Based on his style, even though he didn't line up there. He defends hard against the run game. And
he's physical.
Really works to get past. He's physical. He's not afraid to tackle. He fights past blocks or anticipates it and beats the blockers to the spot. And I also like the way he breaks forward on plays, both run against the run and the pass, off of his back pedal to then break downhill to either break up a pass or to tackle the ball carrier.
Yeah. So I ended up watching which game was it? I ended up watching his games against West Virginia, and then his game against who was it? Shoot, it was another Big Ten program, I think. I can't remember which the other one was. My apologies. I watched two of his games. He plays faster than a 4.6. He looks quicker out there than I think his 40 time. I think he's one of those, plays faster on the field than he tests. Like, he's not a track star. But he looks fast out there. He looks small out there. So that's definitely something. He is physical, like when coming down. I do think, at times he gets he's giving a little too much space to inbreakers, which I think is at times a problem. Maybe if he's in the slot, he gets more help on the inside from a linebacker. But my takeaway was mostly just why not in the 7th? Like, it's the 255th pick. He has put better stuff on tape than previously, and I think there's better football in him than a 7th round pick. I think he's somewhere between how good he was in 2022 and how poorly he played and tested and worked out at the Senior Bowl in 2023. I think there is a player in the middle of that is a fine and solid player that probably, if he stayed another year in college and came back and put together, a season that was between 22 and 23, goes in somewhere around the 5th round. And so I think getting that player in the 7th round is very much like that's totally worth it. I mean, we saw Packers players, Jaden Reed tweeted like, this is not a 7th round player, because if you go back and look at his matchups against Michigan State 2 years prior, Jaden Reed and Kalen King had a pretty good duel going, on the outside. I think they each got each other one time, and then there was one that was, maybe a penalty, maybe not a penalty on King. It was a pretty physical matchup, pretty physical pass breakup. But I just think that there's
quotes from a number of players who were kind of in support of him after the draft. Like players you wouldn't necessarily have expected. I can't remember who it was like Sauce Gardner or somebody. I can't remember now if I've got that right, who had positive things to say about him after the draft.
Yeah, and I do think he's, he's a physical player. The one thing I will say, though, is yes, he shows good tackling at times. His missed tackle rate is not great. I just looked to I was curious. He was 317th in missed tackle rate amongst those corners, that subset of 497 corners in 2023. And in 2022, he was better, but still not great. He was still 232nd in missed tackle rate amongst those 500. So, middle of the pack. And that's while playing, the majority of his snaps outside. He wasn't playing a whole lot of slot while at Penn State. So the missed tackle rate numbers are not great. Hopefully, that's more noise, and, when he's put in a different position, he can do a little better. I do think there are times on tape when he shows he comes down physically. It's not an issue of mentality or stuff like that. I think it's more of a technique thing. So maybe they can clean that up and he can be, a solid slot corner going forward. The size is always going to be an issue there, but I think that there's more promise there than those missed tackle rate numbers maybe show.
Yeah, and he's kind of on the lower end of weight, but he's not really really small in terms of his weight.
Yeah, I mean, he's short and light, but at least his built kind of, his build is normal. It's not like he's really tall and wiry and thin. I'd rather someone be short and light than tall and light, I guess. But
at 191 pounds, it's not too bad.
Yeah. But anyway, That's all I had to say on Kalen King. Dad, anything else that you wanted to toss in before we wrap up here?
I think that's it. I think I had kind of how I felt about him. I think your comment on he's probably somewhere in between,
Yeah.
2022 and 2023. I think the 2022, it's unlikely that Packers are going to, hit at that level. That'd be awesome if he plays for the Packers at his 2022 level. But I think the Packers have been lately hitting on a kind of market inefficiency and getting players who played well 2 years ago, and that too many teams are ruling out players based on just their most recent year and letting Packers get some steals.
Yeah, and hopefully King is another instance of that. And hopefully he'll be, competing in that slot corner spot and, pushing everyone around him to be better. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. This has been the final of our deep dives into the Packers draft class, but don't worry, we will still be doing an episode every single week for the rest of the offseason, talking about offensive line combinations, what we think the optimal one's going to be, how we think the receivers should be deployed, what we think, the role of fullback is in this offense in terms of will Henry Pearson be getting, snaps, or will that be a Ben Sims role, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to have so much to talk about, what our thoughts on Josh Jacobs are, how much work Marshawn. There's going to be a lot to talk about between now and the start of the year. And you're not going to want to turn that dial. You're going to want to turn it into here. Once again, follow us on Twitter at FatherSonPackers so you get updated when all the new episodes are out and, any other, Packers news, et cetera, et cetera. Subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.